In the year 2000, two guys flew to Dallas with a simple offer. Sell us your tiny mail-order DVD company for $50 million. The executives across the table laughed them out of the room. That company was Netflix. The guys laughing were Blockbuster. And that single meeting is just one of 10 moments on this list where a giant company looked the future directly in the eye and decided it wasn't worth taking seriously. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what killed 10 companies that used to be impossible to avoid, and a few of these stories are going to make you genuinely angry on behalf of the people who saw it coming and got ignored. If you appreciate this type of content, gently tap that like button. Here we go. Picture this. It's 2003, and a small team out of Estonia just built something nobody else had figured out yet. Free video calling that actually worked over the internet. Within 2 years, 40 million people were using it, and eBay handed over $2.6 billion just to own a piece of it. Eventually, Microsoft bought the whole thing in 2011 for $8.5 billion. Skype wasn't just a product, it was a verb. You didn't call your grandmother, you Skyped her. So what happened? Microsoft had a choice to make: pour resources into the thing it just paid billions for, or build something new of its own. It chose the new thing. Over the next decade, while Skype quietly sat there, Microsoft poured its marketing budget and its engineering talent into a fresh competitor called Teams. Nobody at Microsoft was trying to kill Skype on purpose. They just stopped feeding it. By early 2023, the 300 million monthly users Skype once had shrunk down to just 36 million. On May 5th of 2025, Microsoft finally pulled the plug and pushed everyone toward Teams instead. Skype didn't lose to a rival. It lost to its own family. Circuit City's ending moves a lot faster, and honestly, it's a little more brutal. In November of 2008, the company had 34,000 employees still showing up to work and $11.6 billion of annual income coming in the door every year. Read that again. This wasn't a company nobody wanted to shop at anymore. The business underneath was still alive. They scrambled, secured over $1 billion in emergency financing, and went looking for a buyer who could keep the lights on. Multiple firms looked at the books. Every single one walked away because the debt sitting on top of the company was just too heavy for anyone to want to inherit. By March 8th, all 567 stores were closed and locked for good. Here's the detail that really gets people. Within a year, a huge share of those exact same buildings reopened with a different sign out front: Best Buy. Circuit City didn't just lose to its biggest rival, it handed that rival the keys. Which brings us back to that meeting in Dallas. Picture the room. On one side, a couple of guys from a company most people had never heard of, with fewer than 300,000 subscribers and a business model nobody quite trusted yet. On the other side, Blockbuster, sitting on over 9,000 stores, 60,000 employees, and $6 billion a year in revenue. When Netflix offered to sell for $50 million, it wasn't a power move, it was basically pocket change for a company Blockbuster's size. They said no. They laughed, according to the people who were there. And here's why that laugh is so expensive in hindsight. Roughly 16% of Blockbuster's entire revenue, around $800 million a year, was coming from something customers actively hated: late fee. Netflix's whole pitch was built around getting rid of exactly that pain point, and Blockbuster owned the chance to buy that idea outright for the cost of a rounding error. Instead, Blockbuster didn't even launch its own online rental option until 2004, 4 years later. By September of 2010, Blockbuster was filing for bankruptcy with close to $1 billion in debt. That same year, Netflix hit 20 million subscribers and was about to launch streaming. $50 million was never the real number that mattered here. What mattered was a company so sure of its own size that it genuinely couldn't picture a world that didn't need 9,000 stores. Now let's talk about the one almost everyone's heard of, but barely anyone actually knows the real shape of. In August of 2000, Enron stock was trading at $90.75 a share, and the company was the 7th largest in the entire United States by revenue. Magazines were calling it the most innovative company in America 6 years running. But underneath all of that praise, executives were running a trick called mark-to-market accounting, which let them book profits from deals that hadn't even happened yet, as if the cash was already sitting in the bank. They built more than 3,000 shell entities specifically designed to hide around $25 billion in debt off the official books. For years, almost nobody outside the company knew. Then, in October of 2001, the SEC opened an investigation, and the whole story started unraveling in public. The stock didn't just dip, it collapsed. By the end of November, a share that had been worth $90 was worth just 26 cents. On December 2nd, Enron filed for what was, at the time, the largest bankruptcy in American history. About 5,600 people lost their jobs in the fallout. And roughly $2.1 billion in pension money disappeared right along with them, because thousands of ordinary employees had their retirement savings tied directly to the same stock that just went to zero. The people who built the fraud walked away with millions before it collapsed. The people who trusted the company lost everything they'd saved. This next one might be the most painful story on the entire list, because Kodak didn't fail to predict the future. They built it with their own two hands, and then they hid it in a drawer. In 1975, a Kodak engineer named Steve Sasson built a clunky, toaster-sized box that did something nobody else's camera could do: capture a picture without any film at all. The first digital camera in the world. He brought it to his bosses expecting them to be thrilled. Instead, in his own words, the reaction he got was curiosity and skepticism, because to them, it just didn't feel like a major invention. The real fear inside the building was simpler than that. A camera with no film meant no more film sales, and film was the golden goose keeping Kodak afloat. So instead of building the future, they buried it and kept selling rolls of film for another 2 decades. At its peak, Kodak had a market cap of $28 billion and controlled 90% of the entire US film market. But once digital cameras finally did take over the world, Kodak was years behind companies with no film business to protect, watching its own market share collapse from 24% down to just 7% in only 5 years. On January 19th of 2012, Kodak filed for bankruptcy, with court filings showing $5.1 billion in assets sitting against $6.8 billion in liabilities. They held the future in their hands in 1975, and they let go of it on purpose. Now here's one that sounds like a retail story but is actually a heist. In 2005, 3 investment firms looked at Toys R Us and saw something most shoppers never would: a pile of valuable real estate they could borrow against. So they bought the company for $6.6 billion in what's called a leveraged buyout. Here's the part that should make your blood boil a little. In a leveraged buyout, the firm doing the buying doesn't pay for the company with its own money. It makes the company itself borrow the money and then hands the company the bill. Over $5 billion of that purchase price landed directly on Toys R Us as debt, overnight, before a single customer had even noticed anything changed. From that point on, the company was paying roughly $400 million a year just in interest, money that should have gone toward fixing up dingy stores or finally building a website that could compete with Amazon. Toys R Us had $2.2 billion sitting in the bank. By 2017, that had been drained down to just $301 million. The stores were still full of kids. The shelves were still full of toys. The company simply could not breathe under the weight of its own purchase price. In September of 2017, it filed for bankruptcy, and within a year, almost every single US location was gone for good. Radio Shack was once the place every electronics nerd in America had memorized the layout of, peaking in 1999 with more than 8,000 stores and around $3 billion a year coming in. But while Amazon was already up and running, Radio Shack genuinely didn't launch its own online store until the year 2000, 6 full years behind, and that head start never got clawed back. The debt piled up quietly for years until, by February of 2015, it crossed $1 billion and Radio Shack filed for bankruptcy for the first time. A hedge fund swooped in, bought what was left, and tried pairing up with Sprint, turning store shelves into phone counters. It didn't work. Just over 1,000 stores closed almost overnight. And by March of 2017, barely 2 years later, Radio Shack was back in bankruptcy court for a second time. Quick break. If you want more breakdowns like this, subscribe and like the video. It genuinely helps this channel keep making this kind of content. Alright, back to it. Kmart's story is the slowest one on this entire list, and honestly, that might be why almost nobody noticed it actually happening. The company filed for bankruptcy in January of 2002, the largest US retailer ever to do so at that point, while it was still running over 2,100 stores across the country. It clawed its way out of bankruptcy by 2003, and then in 2005 made a desperate bet, merging with an equally struggling Sears in an $11 billion deal, hoping 2 weak companies could somehow add up to one strong one. The combined company kept bleeding market share to Walmart and Target for over a decade, then filed its own bankruptcy in 2018. And through every single year of that stretch, individual Kmart stores just kept closing, one or two at a time, almost never making the news because losing one more Kmart stopped feeling like a story a long time ago. Right now, there are only a small handful of Kmart locations left standing in the entire country, down from well over 2,000 at the height of it all. It just slowly stopped existing while everyone was looking somewhere else. Now, this next one might be the single fastest collapse you'll ever hear about in business history. In 1996, a piece of software called Netscape Navigator controlled 86% of how human beings accessed the entire internet. That's not winning a market, that's basically owning it outright. Microsoft's answer was simple and devastating. Just bundle Internet Explorer directly into Windows for free on a system already running on more than 90% of personal computers. During a federal antitrust trial, showed executives talking openly about wanting to, in their own words, cut off Netscape's air supply. By 1998, Netscape's 86% had already collapsed under 50%. That same year, AOL bought what was left for $4.2 billion, a number that sounds enormous until you remember the company had been worth even more than that just 3 years before. By 2002, Internet Explorer owned over 95% of the browser market. Go back and sit with that timeline for a second. 86% to functionally nothing in about 3 years flat. And finally, here's the one company on this entire list that genuinely did die overnight. No slow fade, no decade of warning signs. On December 21st of 1988, Pan Am Flight 103 exploded over the small Scottish town of Lockerbie, killing all 259 people on board and 11 more on the ground below. It remains one of the deadliest terrorist attacks in aviation history. And here's the thing about Pan Am specifically. For over 60 years, the entire brand had been built on one single promise: safety. International bookings collapsed almost the moment the news broke because the one thing customers paid a premium for had just been shattered in front of the whole world. The airline was already shaky, weighed down by an expensive earlier acquisition and debt left over from the oil crisis of the 1970s. It limped along for 3 more years, selling off prized routes like its Heathrow slots just to keep cash flowing. On January 8th of 1991, Pan Am finally filed for bankruptcy, and that December 4th, it flew its very last flight from Barbados to Miami, putting roughly 7,500 people out of work in a single day. Every other company on this list took years, sometimes literal decades, to actually disappear. Pan Am took one night over one small town and never recovered. And if you want to see more breakdowns like this one, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next video. There's a lot more of these coming.